The ballroom pulsed like a living heart, gold and glass trembling beneath 1,000 breaths. He felt it before he saw her, a silence that sliced through music, laughter, and champagne. When she stepped from behind the silk curtain, the world forgot how to move. She stood where no one expected her to ever belong, her name rising through the speakers like a prophecy rewritten. He clapped because the cameras demanded it, because pride dies quietly when the past walks back into the room wearing triumph. The woman he once left behind for being unworthy now stood crowned beneath his family's crest, her smile sculpted from years of scars. And as the crowd roared, he realized too late that elegance could be the sharpest blade of all. The after-party shimmered like deceit. Gold, laughter spilled from lips painted in secrets, while chandeliers trembled above fragile egos. He approached her on the balcony where the city glittered beneath them, and the wind carried the faint scent of nostalgia and danger. Their words were polite, meaningless, but every glance felt like a confession disguised as small talk. When he raised his glass to toast her success, she met his eyes with perfect calm and said she owed everything to rejection, the sweetest cruelty she'd ever survived. The silence that followed was louder than applause. The limousine hummed through wet streets, city lights smearing into streaks of gold on the window. Gabriel sat beside her, his silence gentle, his presence grounding. He asked if it hurt, seeing him again. She smiled faintly, watching her reflection in the glass instead of answering. The city blurred, but her focus remained razor clear. Success wasn't revenge until he needed her. Tonight was only the prologue. Tomorrow she would make him beg for her brilliance, like currency. In his office high above Paris, silence clung like frost. The city's reflection wrapped around him in fractured glass. He replayed her reveal on a muted screen, the loop of her smile tearing through composure. Investors would call at dawn. His mother would demand strategy, but none of it mattered. Beneath the weight of the Volkov empire, he finally understood what he'd lost. For the first time in years, the man who had everything realized he had nothing that mattered. The night ended in quiet triumph. In her penthouse, she removed her earrings, each one falling like a memory hitting marble. Her reflection in the vanity was calm, the kind of calm that comes after fire. On the table lay a photograph, the two of them laughing in some forgotten summer, sunlight and innocence long gone. She studied it for one breath, then slipped it into a drawer and closed it softly, sealing the past where it belonged. The city pulsed beyond the glass, unaware that tonight marked the rebirth of everything she'd once been denied. The city looked softer in memory, less cruel, more forgiving. Before the fame, before the fall, there was only the ache of wanting to belong. He had found her sketching in the corner of a Paris cafe, coffee stains on her notebook, hope shining through exhaustion. He called her work, raw perfection, and promised her the world. She believed him because he said it like a vow. Nights turned into mornings filled with laughter, rooftop wine, and plans that felt like destiny. But love, she'd learn, doesn't survive among people who treat hearts like accessories. Their first night together burned into her memory like a secret she'd never admit. He showed her his world. Marble staircases, private galleries, music that felt like sin and silk. She didn't belong there. Not yet. But the way he looked at her made her forget. He whispered that love didn't need permission, and she wanted to believe it. Beneath the chandeliers, she laughed like she'd never known hunger. It was the last time she'd feel small enough to fit into his world. Love was simpler before the whispers began. His family called her an inconvenience, a passing distraction unfit for their legacy. His father's voice was law, and he followed it like scripture. She noticed the shift first. Dinners canceled, calls unanswered, affection replaced by polite distance. The cruelty wasn't in his words, but in the silence that followed. When he finally ended it, he didn't look at her. He looked through her, like she was something he'd already erased. She didn't cry when he left. She simply disappeared. Paris became her battlefield. She worked until her fingers bled, until exhaustion became prayer. She walked runways that laughed at her name and designed clothes no one wanted, until one night the right woman noticed. That woman saw not poverty, but purity. And when her first collection finally walked, the applause was louder than any apology could ever be. He saw her again years later, not in person, but on the cover of a magazine he wished he could ignore. The new face of modern luxury, it read. Her gaze from the page felt like revenge written in ink. He tore the magazine in half, but it didn't help. You can't destroy what already lives in your memory. She had become everything he once feared she could be. Untouchable. The boardroom smelled of power and fear. Polished mahogany, old money and secrets hidden beneath the sheen of professionalism. She entered with quiet poise, her heels whispering against marble floors that had never welcomed anyone like her before. The men around the table pretended not to stare, but even their silence bent in her direction. He sat at the head, the same chair his father once ruled from, the weight of legacy tightening around his shoulders. She began the presentation, her voice steady, her words carved in elegance. Every slide of her campaign was a mirror held to his downfall. Beauty, rebellion, rebirth. He tried not to show it, but she could feel his pulse from across the table. Revenge, she thought, was not rage. It was control. Backstage at the campaign shoot, silence hummed louder than the clicking cameras. Every glance, every instruction carried the echo of what they used to be. He watched her direct models with the same authority he once claimed for himself. Her confidence was unnerving. It didn't ask for space, it commanded it. When he finally spoke, his words were small and rehearsed. "You've changed." She turned to him. Smile faint, eyes unflinching. "No," she said softly. "I became who you told me I couldn't be." The flashbulbs caught the moment like lightning striking marble. Vivian watched them from across the gala floor. That night, her glass of champagne trembling ever so slightly, she saw what her son refused to. That power had changed hands, and there was no reclaiming it. Later, she cornered Isabella beneath the staircase, away from the glittering crowd. Her tone was velvet over steel as she asked what Isabella really wanted. Isabella's answer came like silk drawn through a blade, just to be remembered by the ones who forgot me. The older woman smiled, recognizing both threat and grace in the same breath. The photo campaign launched the next morning, her face everywhere. Billboards, magazines, digital screens. The world called it genius. The Volkov brand was reborn overnight, but the victory didn't taste sweet to him. Each image of her reminded him of the love he'd buried under ambition. He stood before the largest screen in Paris, her eyes staring down at him from 10 stories high, and wondered if redemption had a price he could still afford to pay. That night, he found her alone in the design studio, the soft hum of machines echoing through the dark. She was sketching, the same way she used to, only sharper now, like art forged in battle. He told her the board adored her work, that investors were calling non-stop. She didn't look up. "Good," she said. "Then you finally understand my work." When she did meet his eyes, it wasn't hatred he saw there. It was something worse, pity. And for the first time, he felt like the poor one. The storm came quietly. Success wrapped around her like perfume, intoxicating, expensive, but faintly suffocating. Everywhere she turned, she saw her face, her name, her legacy. Yet when the noise faded, loneliness waited like an old friend. Late one evening, Vivienne arrived unannounced. The older woman's words were soft but deliberate. "You've won, my dear. Do you know what it cost him?" For a moment, Isabella felt the ground tilt. Not from guilt, but from the unsettling truth that she still cared. Power didn't erase love. It only disguised it. Gabriel found her sketching alone at sunrise, surrounded by silence and discarded ideas. He placed a coffee beside her and watched her draw. lines sharp, precise, almost angry. When he told her she was losing herself, she laughed softly, the sound brittle as glass. "Maybe this is who I was all along," she said. He didn't argue, but the sadness in his eyes said everything. He loved her enough to want her peace more than her power, and that she knew made him dangerous to her mission. At the next board meeting, Vivienne unveiled a new partnership, one that would merge Volkov with a rival brand, stripping Adrian of control. The betrayal sliced deeper than any rumor. Isabella watched him absorb the blow, his face unreadable, but his knuckles white. The mother, who once protected him now, orchestrated his downfall with grace. When the meeting ended, Isabella lingered. Their eyes met across the polished table, hers calm, his fractured. For the first time, revenge didn't feel like victory. That evening, Adrian found her at the empty atelier, tracing patterns under the soft hum of the sewing machines. The air between them trembled with all the words they'd buried. He told her he never stopped thinking about that night, the night he left her in silence. She didn't look up. "I'm not the same woman you left behind," she said. "And you're not the man I love." Still, when he stepped closer, she didn't move away. Their reflections merged in the window, two ghosts trapped between what was and what could never be again. The next morning, she woke to a message from Vivienne, a private invitation, discreet but heavy with implication. Inside the Volkov archives, Vivienne revealed an old recording. Adrian, his father, his voice cold, commanding his son to end things years ago. The truth twisted through the air like smoke. All those nights she thought him heartless, he'd been cornered by duty. The revelation didn't undo the past, but it cracked something inside her. A small mercy, a terrible clarity. She walked out into the daylight, knowing forgiveness was harder than vengeance. The recording haunted her through the night. Each word, each command from his father, rewrote every wound she'd carried. She sat on her balcony, city lights flickering below, torn between fury and forgiveness. Love didn't vanish. It simply changed its shape, waiting in the shadows for the truth to arrive. When dawn broke, she knew the war was no longer against him. It was against the ghosts that made them both. Somewhere across the river, he sat in his own silence, unaware that she finally understood the cost of his choice. Adrian stood in the boardroom facing ruin. The merger had fractured trust, investors were fleeing, and the press smelled blood. His mother's empire, his inheritance, was dissolving beneath his hands. Yet, amid the chaos, he thought only of her. Every decision he'd made to protect her had led here, to collapse. When the cameras arrived, he smiled for them like his mother taught him to. Perfection, composure, denial. But behind the mask, the Empire heir had finally become a man, stripped of everything but regret. When she arrived at Maison Volkov that afternoon, the building felt different, stripped of arrogance, humming with quiet desperation. The staff moved with careful urgency, the scent of panic disguised beneath perfume. She entered his office without knocking. He looked up, surprised, and for the first time didn't try to hide his exhaustion. She placed the recorder on his desk. "You never told me," she said. His silence was an answer. What lingered between them wasn't hatred anymore. It was grief for the love that might have survived if only truth had come sooner. Gabriel found her later that evening, standing before the mirrors of the runway, the final collection laid out in silence. He had always been her anchor, but tonight he could see her drifting back toward the storm. "You don't owe him anything," he said. She turned to face him, eyes glistening, voice calm. "No, but I owe myself closure." He wanted to reach for her, but didn't. Some stories weren't meant to end with comfort, only understand. Night fell like surrender. She returned to the atelier alone and began to design the final gown, the one she'd envisioned years ago. when heartbreak was still fresh and ambition still fragile. Thread by thread, she sewed her story into fabric. Not revenge, not pride, but release. Each stitch whispered forgiveness in silence. When she finished, she stood before the mirror, watching herself become both muse and memory. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled over the city, and for the first time she didn't flinch. The morning arrived with headlines sharp as knives. Maison Volkov, near collapse. Adrian Volkov faces internal revolt. He watched his empire unravel in real time, the weight of legacy slipping from his grasp. The board turned cold, the markets colder. But before despair could devour him, she walked in, calm, radiant, untouchable. She didn't come to watch him fall. She came to offer terms. Her brand, her influence, her name could save everything, but not for free. The man who once discarded her for being poor now needed her to survive. And in that silent moment, she became the one holding the crown. Her proposal was simple. She would buy controlling shares, restructure the house, and rebrand Volkov under her creative direction. He resisted, pride flickering in his eyes like the last light before dusk. But she was prepared for every argument, every plea. This wasn't vengeance anymore. It was restoration. Her name etched beside his. The one who once cast her out, now signing beneath her authority. When he finally agreed, the pen shook in his hand. She didn't gloat. Instead, she looked at him and whispered, "Now we build something honest." Vivienne watched the transaction unfold from her office, her reflection merging with the city skyline. For years, she had built an empire of appearances, and now she saw its crown pass to the woman she once underestimated. When Isabella entered to speak, there was no hostility, only mutual recognition. "You remind me of myself," Vivienne said with a wistful smile. "But I never learned when to stop fighting." Isabella bowed her head slightly. "Then let me finish what you started. Differently." For the first time, Vivienne looked almost relieved. The new campaign launched at midnight. Billboards illuminated the city with her vision. Diversity, defiance, rebirth. Every face told a story of survival. The brand that once rejected her now became the anthem of strength. Adrian stood beside her at the launch, applause thundering through the hall. He turned to her, voice almost breaking beneath pride and regret. "You saved it." She met his gaze, steady, unguarded. "No. I saved myself." The house just came with it. After the lights dimmed and the cameras left, they found themselves alone on the empty runway. For a moment, there were no titles, no empires, no debts left between them. Only two people who had lost and found themselves in the same storm. He reached out, fingertips brushing hers, a gesture without demand. She didn't pull away. The silence stretched, fragile, forgiving. Then she turned to leave, her steps echoing softly, the sound of closure dressed in silk. Paris awoke beneath a rain of light. The city was dressed in her image now. The face that once begged for belonging now defined what beauty meant. The world had rewritten her name in gold. Yet, as she looked from her hotel window, she felt something quieter than triumph. Success had never been about revenge. It was about survival with elegance intact. Somewhere she knew he was watching too. Not with envy, but understanding. Sometimes love doesn't die. It simply learns how to let go in style. Adrian walked the halls of Maison Volkov one last time. The walls that once echoed his father's authority now whispered with her scent, jasmine and ambition. Employees nodded respectfully, but their loyalty had shifted. They belonged to her vision now. He stopped at the office door that used to define him and placed the keys on the table. Power had cost him love, and losing it gave him peace. For the first time, he felt free enough to breathe without pretending. That evening, the final show began. She didn't plan to walk the runway. She never did. But as the lights dimmed and the music rose, Something pulled her forward. The gown she wore shimmered like a memory. Ivory silk threaded with gold, stitched from the night she began again. The crowd held its breath as she walked, every step a confession, every glance a goodbye. When she reached the end of the runway, she paused, smiled faintly, and bowed, not to them, but to her past. Among the spectators, Adrian stood in the shadows, unseen but unshaken. As the applause thundered, his eyes found her under the glow, the woman he had broken, rebuilt, and finally released. Pride welled in him, not possession. He didn't need to speak. His silence said enough. She turned her head just slightly, as if she felt it, that invisible thread of memory still unbroken, still soft. Theirs was no longer a love story. It was a requiem told in silk and forgiveness. Later that night, Paris slept while she stood on the bridge over the Seine. The city reflected in rippling gold below. She let the wind lift her hair and closed her eyes, finally light enough to let go. The past was no longer a wound, but a story she had mastered. Behind her, the Maison Volkov banners swayed in silence, her legacy written across them. She smiled once, not for the world, but for herself. In the distance, a single car slowed, headlights brushing her silhouette before fading into the dark.